Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion. Our topic today is creating couple connection in a chaotic world. Certainly, all of us will agree that just about the last year has seen us living in a world that we never could imagine. Um, we go from hopes of having the COVID pandemic gone to the realities of many other things that are happening in our world. Black Lives Matter protests, starting with the death of many Black men and women, other kinds of protests and demonstrations around political disputes, around election disputes. It's indeed a challenging time to exist, even if we did not have a COVID pandemic. So, today, what we would like to do is share some of our learning as professional marriage and family therapists, as well as our own personal experience about how do you actually negotiate this world, especially as a couple. As I was preparing for today, I found a few interesting facts that I wanted to share with our audience and with our panelists as well. The most interesting fact is that as I was looking at research, it seemed that every group from the Kinsey Institute to professional family therapy journals had a little different spin on how couples are actually responding to this crazy time we're living in. So I want to share some of those facts. Some researchers discovered that there was increased relationship conflict. Others discovered that there was also high rates of, as to quote the author, contacting alternative sexual romantic partners. I think we understand what that means, affairs and other permutations of couplings. Other kinds of researchers indicated that people had indicated that their interest in their marriage or in the number of even getting married was down 18% in Hawaii, down 17% in Florida, down 9% in Arizona, and down 8% in Oregon. These were the states where researchers could access the signing on of marriage certificates, contracts in during the lockdown kind of phase. So the other figure that is a frightening figure is that all domestic violence shelters seem to indicate that, at least in the United States, domestic violence is up about 10%. At the same time, other researchers find that 58% of spouses say that they appreciate their marriage more. 51% say that all these events, not only the COVID-19, but also racial injustices and protests, economic dilemmas, and also political disputes, have made them appreciate their marriage even more. So, what is the situation? Well, perhaps in another year we'll have more definitive research on this. But one thing that most researchers really agree upon is that it is likely that for couples who already had difficulties and problems in their marriages and relationships, that being under all these various pandemics of COVID-19, of racial injustice, of economic inequality and a political dispute probably exacerbated those problems that already existed. For those couples who already had a fairly solid marriage, they probably were together more than they typically are. So they began to appreciate what they had. So those are some of the things that I've been able to kind of dig up. There are other kinds of pieces. And so what I want to do now is to just briefly introduce our panel. And when I call your name, if you'd kind of raise your hand, I'm glad to have my colleagues from CTS. We're doing this as part of our employment, our status, our roles at Christian Theological Seminary, where we have a COMT, a nationally accredited marriage and family therapy program. So the core faculty we have here today is myself, is Dr. Jacquie Braeger, is Dr. Christina Davis, and we also have a lecturer here. We're proud to have Dr. Shruti Poulsen, and then supervisors. We all supervise, but we have two special supervisors, Reverend Kimberly King and Reverend William Bauzo. So welcome today to this panel discussion. What I'd like to start out with is ask you a general question. We'll kind of do a round robin, and then if you want to interact, that would be great. Please remember to do not be like me in class. Remember to unmute yourself when you're talking. So this is our general question. Given the fact that all of you work with couples, that all of you are therapists and see couples, that all of us here are supervisors, what thoughts would you share with our audience about how we create couple connection in a chaotic world? Dr. Braeger, would you like to get us started?
She beat me to the unmuting myself. Hi, I'm Jacquie Braeger, and I was just about to respond to that question by saying that for me, both personally and professionally, it's been intentionality has been a big key factor. It seems almost counterintuitive that because we're on top of each other and we're seeing a lot of each other, that things will just spontaneously happen and we really don't have to plan or, make a schedule in terms of doing things together as a couple. But actually, my husband and I found that it was super helpful over this past year to really plan throughout the week regular connecting times where we get together. We share dinner, we watch a series on Netflix, really small things that we can do and we can look forward to throughout the week has really, really helped both of us feel less stress, closer together. That's a real simple thing, but it's paid big dividends.
So I will pick up on that theme that my colleague Jacquie is speaking of in how to invest in the little moments, so to speak. A lot of times couple connection, I think clients can think of it as, you've got to do these grand sweeping gestures, or you've got to kind of, stress yourself out about how to create, sustain, and keep couple connection. But I think, especially if you're working from home, you have these increased opportunities for the little things, whether it be a smile, whether it be a hug throughout the day, whether it be a kind comment, a recognition of the other person. A lot of the work of the Gottmans speak to this kind of thing, that if you can increase your ratio of positive interactions, even when the conflicts happen, because they will, it helps you to weather those better. So the ratio that the Gottmans came up with is that, couples that are doing well have about 5 positive interactions to the 1 that's a negative interaction. And so trying to keep those positive interactions happening on a consistent basis. And then conversely, couples that are in more trouble tend to have more of a 1-to-1, negative and positive. And so really investing in those positive interactions.
For me, I would also kind of piggyback on my colleague, Dr. Davis, in talking about Gottman's work. He talks about the 4 horsemen of communication, and speaks to 4 patterns of communication that we want to stay away from. One being criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt. And he gives specific antidotes to those specific communication patterns that are destructive. He states that up to 90% of couples who are periodically utilizing those dysfunctional patterns tend to end up in divorce or separation or breakup. And so some of those antidotes are having a gentle startup versus criticizing your partner and being able to talk to them in a gentle way, maybe requesting a change request, or maybe wanting to kind of point out something that you're needing from them, but doing it in a kind and gentle way. They also talk about self-soothing when you are feeling overwhelmed and starting to shut down. And so when you're starting to begin to stonewall, trying to self-soothe and help yourself kind of calm down before you disconnect in that fashion from your partner. Another way of being able to sort of improve communication and improve the relationship is creating a culture of appreciation. And so versus being sort of stuck in that sort of contempt cycle, you start creating a culture of appreciation to help your partner know that you do appreciate them and that they are your equal, versus making them feel maybe less than or inadequate. And then also he speaks as to taking responsibility for your actions versus becoming defensive, and being able to be accountable to your partner, and being able to say, hey, I messed up. I didn't do the dishes as I said I would. And now the dishes are everywhere. So taking accountability for your inaction, or taking accountability for your action, is really, really important.
I think to add to what my colleagues have mentioned, I would say that it would be important for partners to, be able to reach, again, to use, I would say, Gottman's language, but to be able to reach out towards each other, to acknowledge that this is kind of unusual and it's been going on for a while, and to make that a little bit more transparent, between them, that the chaotic nature of the pandemic and all of the other social and political factors are adding layers that many of us maybe have not experienced, in our own relationships and personally. And so to be able to reach to each other, to acknowledge that, yeah, this is, and I speak from the personal position of my partner and I spend a lot of time together in pretty small quarters on a normal basis, regardless of pandemic. And so, but even without the pandemic, it's like, oh yeah, this is different. This is still different.
Kim,
Well, I'm in
would you add
agreement with
something?
all of my colleagues. I would add that, yes, I would agree with all of my colleagues and add that it is important to continue your own self-care in the midst of this pandemic, because if we're caring for ourselves well, we're better able to hear our partner's challenges, to act about those challenges. So I just want to remind couples that individually you need to be doing so.
I want to add a note of clarification for our audience. You've heard some of the panelists refer to the name Gottman, so I want to give just a little thumbnail sketch of that reference. John and Julie Gottman are marriage therapists who live and work in the Seattle area. They've done about 25 years of research on what constitutes a solid marriage, as well as discovering some of the telltale signs that William referred to that may preview a potential divorce. So that's something that our students work on in our program at CTS. And one thing that the Gottmans do talk about, and I'd like to kind of get some feedback from the panelist here. I think that for all of us as couples, it's not that any of us have a perfect relationship. Every couple has what the Gottmans call gridlock issues. Those are issues that even on the best of days with our spouse, if something happens, the gridlock issue might rear up. Sometimes it has to do with cultural context where we see the world differently. It can be a lot of other different things. So what I'd like to hear from people is, okay, yeah, I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about is being able to do something if things are going well. But what if we're a couple and we have a lot of gridlock issues, okay? And here we are in this crazy world. Nothing seems to be going well. I can't even get a vaccination. My kids are at home. It is a miserable time I'm having in this world. So what would you say to a couple who has a gridlock issue? And let me name one. A gridlock issue being that one partner always believes that his or her work is more important than the other one, despite the fact that they both may be employed. So that's an example, but there's others. So what would you tell someone in our audience who has a gridlock issue, and this is just making things unbearable?
Two things I would say to that. The first thing I'd always talk with couples about is we got to decide what we can actually make changes around. And I think this is something that we easily forget. So the first thing is to recognize that we can only be in control of our own response and how we show up. And that's really hard once people have been involved in perpetual issues that, cycles that keep going over and over and over again. It's just really easy to forget and get upset with your partner and be outward looking at what they're not doing right, in your opinion. And so the first thing is to sort of back off that ledge and help people recognize what they contribute and what they can bring and what they're responsible for. And then along with that notion is what I think is super helpful in my own relationship and certainly with the couples I work with, and this notion of repair. It's not, Gottman's research has been really clear about this. People have conflict in relationships, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually very normal. And it would be really unusual not to have some conflict in a long-term relationship. But what's more important is the quality of our repair. So, keeping in mind that whenever things go awry, we can always repair. And that's really the first skill that I think it's really important for couples to focus on, is how to do a good quality repair so that you can reconnect and start again, do a redo, so to speak.
I think I agree with you, Dr. Braeger. The repair attempts are very important. I guess what comes to mind for me is the issue of grace, giving oneself grace in these challenging times. And then it's easier said than done. I get that. But, kind of starting from a place of empathy for one's own experience and also your partner. On a more pragmatic level, I know with couples that I work with that are experiencing these gridlock areas, I actually use the language of, what are some ways to make this a win-win? Because gridlock to me speaks to win-lose. And so rather than, what's the compromise, I try to use the language of what are some things that can happen that can actually be a win-win. Now, of course, that still involves somebody putting forth the olive branch or whatever, but can that result in some kind of a win-win scenario versus somebody having to lose out? And sometimes if I use the language of compromise, then people interpret that as, oh, that means I'm going to have, if I compromise, I'm losing out somehow. So I try to use that language of how can this be a good thing, the change in behavior on each part or each person's part be a good thing for the relationship and not just, each individual.
I like the use of the word compromise. And so I'm wondering if any of you have any hints for our audience about how they individually might look at compromise, how they might frame it, how they might word it, and how might they approach their spouse with this?
So I will kind of speak to both this sense of what it means to the how-to. I think there's a phrase that I use a lot with couples that I use myself. It takes a lot of practice. Even therapists need to practice these skills to really make them, especially in the moments of conflict, readily available, and that we can kind of enact those phrases. But it's definitely starting with I. When you are stating how something has made an impact on you and how you feel, I always encourage folks to start with I, so that you can own your part of it. You can own your own experience, your own feelings, and it's not it's not an issue of kind of creating defenses in the other person. It's less likely to do that. And then you go on to state the feeling. I feel less valued when this, I think that's kind of, or I feel unvalued, right? This feeling word. And then kind of to your example, Dr. Coyle, this piece about what is the action that's impacted. I think it's really important to stay as focused on the behavior or the action versus the person's intent, their character, their kind of what they're doing to you. Going back to Dr. Braeger's encouragement to focus on what is your own influence versus, trying to control or state what the other person's doing by saying, an objective, observable behavior. And so I feel unvalued in moments where you have, you prioritize work over the dishes, or that you're working instead of helping out with this piece, something that helps keep it on one action or, a set of actions. And then you make a request. And I think that that's important because, again, in backing away from what people have to do or that sense of controlling other people, it tends to create those less than soft startups that Reverend Bauzo was even encouraging, that we want to really kind of lead with grace and say, in the future, would it be possible to, and then ask for what you need. And I do think it's important to have relationships that foster being able to speak and ask for what one needs, and for a person to be able to be influenced and practice kind of hearing that person out with some empathy. And I think those are some practical phrases. And I'll also just kind of jumping back to the last question a moment, sometimes the gridlock issues can be externalized, right? That there are social, political, sometimes reasons that we have differentials in what the workforce allows for couples to manage. It stretches a lot of couples, especially couples who are managing children at home while working. I mean, so there's some ways to say this is not necessarily an issue between the two of us, but can we join forces on how to address this problem that our situation has put us in? And right, we can kind of name some of those things and help it be the couple against that problem versus the couple against one another.
Let me pick up on what you just said, Christina, about being able to garner your resources so that you can fight something together. And what I want to move to is an acknowledgement, certainly of myself, that my own social location, I have quite a bit of privilege about what I'm able to do or not do. During this pandemic, I mean, I teach at CTS. I've been able to do my job online. Not everybody has that kind of privilege. So, what I'd like to drill down on is how do we as therapists, but also we may have some pastors in the audience, how are we able to support couples who do not have the same kind of work privilege that those of us on the panel have? People who are essential workers, people who have lost their jobs, people who cannot pay their rent, and so they're in an economic hole. I mean, it would seem to me that if I were in that situation, I'd feel very overwhelmed. So, are there some thoughts you have about or suggestions for perhaps couples who find themselves with that kind of dilemma?
It's a big question, Dr. Coyle. What comes to mind is, kind of the hierarchy of needs, et cetera. And so maybe our role then as therapists is to advocate and support our clients in identifying as many of the concrete, pragmatic supports and resources. So I think it behooves us then to become more educated and knowledgeable. Maybe the things like I know all of us are. I know I am struggling with the when is the vaccine and when am I eligible and where do I go and et cetera, et cetera. And so it would probably behoove us to get a little bit more informed about those pragmatics, and in order to be able to support our clients in getting some of that tangible information that is, very necessary right now to everyone's survival, to being able to go back to work, to being able to, et cetera. So I guess that's what comes to mind, is being able to identify what are the resources, what are the supports, and what's in the community that can, help folks through these times when needed. So, and I appreciate your point about that. Yeah, we are coming from a place of privilege, being able to do our jobs and, have access to those types of resources. So.
From the position of a pastor or a community, say that I've done a really good job of responding in the face of the pandemic, and that there are lots of resources available from community organizations and religious organizations, and that what I would encourage folks to do is to take advantage of all of those that they need, to not feel any shame about needing to access resources at a time when you need the resources.
So, in those kinds of situations, I mentioned a number at the beginning when we started our discussion that domestic violence has increased 10%. So here I'm asking all these difficult kinds of questions, but I think that's where so many people are. So let's focus a little bit, and I would like to hear from all of you about what might be some possibilities for a person who is in a violent family situation. They perhaps he or she, usually it's women, but it can be male spouses. Um, that person's lost her job, and her spouse is the one who's still working, and that person is abusive. It could be either gender. Um, Picking up on what Kim said, what might be some steps for that person, and how might we as therapists assist and support, and how might pastors help out?
The first part of that I'd like to say is there's power in telling your story. And so a lot of times these things go on like hidden and secret. And it's very liberating and surprisingly comforting to be able to tell a trusted person like a counselor or a friend that you can trust with your vulnerability, to be able to talk about what's going on, because that's the first part of being able to name it and claim the experience. Then a lot of times in the talking, options and possibilities begin to emerge in terms of what kind of things are possible in terms of action steps at that point to make a change in that kind of experience.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I'll say kind of really quickly that I think one of the resources that I think has really enhanced since the health pandemic is that more resources are more adequately visible online, and perhaps even have virtual options for connecting that weren't that way before. So namely counseling, as Dr. Braeger mentioned, that might make it even that much more of a accessible option for people who really do need that type of help and counseling. And that's my hope, is that meeting of the need with the person has enhanced that once people start telling their story and can be connected, they can actually access it.
And in terms of pastors and churches, I think there are great resources in a variety of different communities to be able to provide pastoral care and counseling as well, to be able to just lend an ear and help guide members of the congregation, or folks who are coming to the church for help when counseling is needed, or that higher level care. But also resources that the church may have available if they lost their job and are needing, food pantry assistance. There's so many congregations that are giving so many resources right now away to the community, and I think it's important to be able to connect with those resources, and for pastors to be aware of all of the different needs that are being spoken about when they are getting that pastoral care.
I think when I think about the situation that we're all in with the pandemic, that sense of isolation comes up, and so for folks who are experiencing intimate partner violence or the risk of that or the danger of that, I wonder about ways to through counseling, obviously, ways to encourage an awareness or understanding of like what might be some other connecting relationships that feel safe. Because again, as a therapist and a supervisor who's watched sessions where there may be some potential for violence or whatever, you feel really kind of like you have no control. This is, they're in their home, you're in your home on your computer. And so I think about, wow, who else might potentially have eyeballs on this situation? I, as a supervisor and a therapist, only maybe once a week with this, and so to work with that partner who is at risk to find out who else could they turn to in the moment if they feel endangered and in need of support, and whether it's through communities like religious faith communities. Do they have someone that they can turn to on short notice, in addition to their therapist, counselor that they may be working with? So that to me comes up as a kind of a critical point, is like, how isolated are they with the partner, that who may be violent towards them, and who else could they reach out to in those situations?
And also, one thing that I would also add on to that is knowing that in our greater community, there are shelters for women and shelters where and for men that can also meet the needs depending on who's the one that is the victim, and being able to get out of that situation where there's confidentiality, where there is safety and really, privacy to where you're located when you feel at risk or you feel like your life is going to be in harm's way. There are many places here in our city, but also across different cities across the nation. So being able to talk to your local leader, your pastor, your counselor, these are the folks that can help guide you and instruct you in terms of what is the best option if you don't have a place to go.
As we move forward, one thing I do want to say to our audience is that if you do have a particular question, you can put that question in the chat box, and we can perhaps address some of those questions. Also, we began at 12, just in terms of time frame. We're looking to go around 60, 75 minutes or so. So as I look here, I do see a question from our audience that I think would be helpful for everyone to address. And so let me read that. It says, please talk about the importance of discussing mental health from the pulpit, in Bible study, with the youth, etc. How do we normalize the support we all need? Great question. I think there's 4 of us who are ministers on this panel, so I'll be quiet and let the others and the laity on the panel speak.
I will go first, as I just co-preaching for 4 weeks about mental health. There was a sermon, a mental health challenge, and then a discussion. It's vitally important that we talk about mental health from the pulpit, not include emotional and mental health in that conversation. The way that we normalize the conversation is to keep having a conversation. Our youth are being impacted by COVID-19 in ways that show up as increased anxiety. Anxiety disorders are the most commonly diagnosed disorders. I think probably the last research I read, about 45% of college students visit their college counseling center are coming in because they feel overwhelmed by anxiety. So we need to just keep having the conversation.
Yeah, one of the things that I found really moving a couple years ago, one of our professors at CTS, not in the counseling arena, in the M.Div side of the fence, who's also a minister, shared publicly at a talk. It's actually on a panel with one of our speakers in the counseling workshop that we do every year. Shared his own brief experience seeking mental health services. And I think there's something really powerful when people in leadership claim it and normalize it and talk about the value of it in their own lives. I think that speaks volumes to people who are listening, people in the congregation. It really gives them hope and courage to access those services for themselves.
Yeah, Dr. Braeger, that I was about to say the same thing, that a certain amount of self-disclosure and sharing, because if we're setting ourselves apart, whether in the pastoral role or as a therapist, again, under these circumstances, I think we're all experiencing varying levels and have in our past lives, I suppose, mental health concerns, and so I think one way we can normalize that is we don't necessarily separate ourselves somehow from the rest of the population that experiences it.
So I echo and support everything that's been said. I think also particularly in faith-based settings is to do a sufficient amount of separating mental illness, particularly from some type of moral failing or some type of spiritual issue, some type of kind of, the individual is not somehow being holy enough or, good enough. And I think that it's really important to teach and preach in ways that don't create those kind of connections and interpretations of what it means to struggle with illness of any kind.
One thing I'm thinking about is we're talking about mental health. Typically, I think we tend to think of mental health as being just individual care. And so, what we're trying to do today is to talk about creating couple connection. One question I have is, how might couples, in the midst of these challenges we're facing, COVID-19, racial injustice, economic disparity, political divides, how can couples prioritize what are the most important conversations to have? Anyone have thoughts? I can hear your brains, the wheels turning, but some mouths open and we'll just kind of share it spontaneously.
I suppose we all have our own priority list. Maybe that's the place to start. And several other folks on the panel have talked a little bit about getting from one's clients what's important to them, their meaning around these things. So that's probably where I would start, is to get a sense of, well, what are each person's priorities. I guess I'm much more pragmatic than I realize. I keep using the word pragmatic, but I think about, well, maybe that's a priority, and I'm thinking about my own relationship, some of the pragmatics of how to navigate the pandemic, for example. Even within relationships, I think it's important to have that conversation of how each person is seeing the safety issues, how large should one's bubble be, and how many times do we go to the grocery store, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I've definitely been hearing anecdotally about conflicts around just navigating how navigating the pandemic safety concerns and whatnot. So maybe that is a priority for some folks, but again, I would sort of have to know from the couple's clients themselves what it is that they're struggling with in order to help them prioritize.
To kind of piggyback about what Dr. Poulsen was talking about, what I have found in my clinical practice with couples is that there is a need to prioritize self-care for each individual person, in particular those who have kids, who are in a hybrid setting for school, or are completely at home, and really work-life balance has been really kind of turned upside down. There are parents right now that are working from home and having to watch their children at the same time due to the lack of funding for resources for childcare, or due to the fact that they're fearful of sending their kids to childcare, or even to school. And so oftentimes there's this overwhelming feeling of I'm on all the time. And I keep hearing that over and over again echoed in the counseling room, that couples are worried or scared to let their partner know, I need time for myself. I need to relax. I need a space away from the children for a little bit just to kind of rejuvenate. And so being able to have open, sincere conversations with your partner and not fear repercussion or fear being angered, and being able to have the opportunity to share that, we both are here for each other, and let's share in that self-care. So if that's, I need to go get a massage, or I need to get a facial, or I need to, just go for a walk at the mall, or if I need to just be able to have a staycation at the house, and just be in my room and binge Netflix, which we all love to do, right? Or binge your favorite show or movie, or even if it's splurge on some dessert, right, that you really enjoy. Who doesn't like cheesecake? So trying to find things that are really, really yours, right? Kind of what Dr. Poulsen was saying, speaking to the need of that individual person, but not enforcing, but kind of helping to encourage the couple to talk about that from a safe place, and it not be added work to the other person, but instead a mutual give and take.
One thing that I just personally find helpful in working with couples is to really take into consideration, and the couple should too. I mean, now we call it social location, but their environmental context. I did inner city ministry in Philadelphia for 4 years. So, certainly, the kinds of conversations I had with couples then were pretty similar to what I have now with couples, because those people lived a life full of deficits every day. So, perhaps one thing, if you're a couple out there or part of a couple, you might be able to do would be just to ask yourself, if I could have a wish, what would be the first thing that I would want to have in my life in the midst of all this isolation, pain, and grief that I'm experiencing now? What is just one thing? Perhaps you could ask your spouse, And then perhaps you might be able, if you have a pod or if you have family, to find some time when you can talk about that. But it is a challenge. So I'm wondering if some of the rest of you on the panel have some practical suggestions about how couples, when they're overly busy anyway now, could actually take a step back and think about what would they most like to have different or enriched in their relationship to better connect.
Yeah, I'll share that. My husband and I, every weekend, we take a little bit of time to just drink some coffee together, maybe, have some breakfast or something, and just talk about our relationship, do like a quick relational checkup. How's it going? How are we doing? What do we like about how the week has gone? What have been some of the challenges that we faced? And if we do it proactively, it's less likely to get reactive. We're calmer, we're looking forward to it, and we actually have some meaningful conversation rather than likely to trigger each other. And so that's been really helpful in this whole year of the pandemic for sure.
Oh, I think I was muted. I'm trying to transfer over my behaviors in a non-helpful way from my classes. So let me start again. An audience question: how do we bridge generational gaps and initiate mental health conversations with younger generations and young couples?
So I'll speak to the young couples part just by normalizing it a bit. I think kind of hearkening back to the Gottmans and their research, it helps when you have like a large pool of data to say what you're going through is normal, not to necessarily think of yourself as, necessarily doing something wrong. But I guess the other side of that is for young couples to know that these challenges can arise, can also be proactive. They can be proactive about doing things to address them. So the Gottman research speaks to how it's within the first 7 years, usually, that half of divorces take place. So this notion of how to think about conflict as an opportunity to really turn towards each other, think about what's going on in the relationship and be proactive about, addressing it. And it's not to say that divorce is always something that's not healthy for the couple. So let me make sure that I just kind of put that out there. But it is to say to be very proactive about what's showing up, because the early years of for couples are very critical in terms of laying a foundation for what's to come. And what sometimes goes along with that, not always, but is the first 3 years after the birth of a child has also been tracked to say that those are times that are in about 67% of couples, they rate those as challenging times. Their couple satisfaction has gone down. And so how then can you prepare? How then can you respond really proactively as a couple to that, knowing that you're not alone, and knowing that there are resources that can help you weather those stages of life.
Other thoughts?
I think given the context of telehealth and accessibility, I think that tends to resonate for younger generations. They're already pretty well versed in the technology and the use of it. And so I think that's one way to appeal to that. Wow, this is a great time to be able to access experts kind of anywhere, really, to help you with or support you with your mental health needs. And I think they would be amenable and open to that.
Yeah, a simple thing that in referencing the question about generational support for relationships, I've raised 4 children. They're all young adults right now, actually, and the oldest 2 are in committed relationships. And so, one of the things that I deliberately do when I'm talking with them is really be aware of you affirming them, affirming their efforts, really being able to recognize the challenges by sharing, my own stories, like, oh my gosh, how are you guys managing? And I remember when we were in school, grad school together, and it was really, a stressful time. How are you guys doing? Things where normalizing and being able to affirm, their commitment to themselves and each other and their relationship, I think goes a long way to people being able to hear and take a risk in terms of talking about things that are challenging.
I think that one thing that ministers might want to consider in their congregations, and you could do this on Zoom, might be able to have intergenerational support among the members of your congregation. So it's kind of like, but in a couple context, what some programs have, grandparent connection, a grandparent connects or adopts, quote unquote, a kid in another generation. I think it would be a great thing to do for a congregation to say, hey, we want to have some of our senior couples who have had solid marriages um, share some of their words of wisdom to younger couples, and you could do that on Zoom, so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
actually,
mhm.
oh,
Go ahead, Shruti.
oh, okay. Yeah, my husband and I, before we got married, when we were engaged, we did what's called engaged encounter, and then several years into our marriage, after our first child, we did marriage encounter. And even though neither one of us were connected to any particular faith community, those types of weekend workshops or whatever you want to call them were connected to, I think, the Episcopalian church. But that was a similar model that we experienced, that during the weekend that they had senior couples who would present on various and talk about various topics like finances and children, et cetera. And we found it to be really beneficial to us as couples to have sort of role models or role modeling. And this is before I was a therapist, so, wasn't in health, but we were very young. So it was very supportive and useful. So to your point, Dr. Coyle, yeah, I think having, and someone outside of your own family setting too is helpful. You're more likely to listen to that, I would imagine. So I think that's a great idea, especially with Zoom now. What a wonderful way to connect, really.
We have another question from the audience. And might the conversation priorities for couples come somewhat from basic needs being addressed first, and then moving to conversations about other priorities like conflict or anxiety?
I think they often can be intertwined, but at the same time, yes, I think, Dr. Poulsen mentioned about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that in some ways, if we address the basic needs, we find ourselves relieving some of the anxiety and some of the conflict, because not having basic needs met can certainly worsen other areas of the relationship.
Yeah, I would agree with Dr. Davis. I think being able to address, what are the needs that I have in this relationship, because it's causing me a great deal of anxiety. I keep thinking about it constantly. And I'm scared to talk to my partner. I oftentimes hear that I'm scared to talk to my partner because I don't want to upset my partner. I don't want to cause conflict. And we live in a very, very rich conflict avoidant culture. And so being able to address that fact that and encourage, our clients, or encourage folks to, figure out, how can I talk to my partner in a gentle way? How can I communicate what I'm needing at a basic level? If that's, basic love languages, right? If I need that physical touch, quality time, if I need, more words of affirmation, being able to do it from a perspective where it doesn't come off as defensive or rude or a critique that may hurt the other person, but instead using I statements like, I need a hug. So you're saying that you want me to give you a hug? Yes. I need to have a date night with you, even if it's at the house due to COVID, or if we just, order in, Grubhub, DoorDash, they're wonderful options to have date nights. Or if we have been quarantined and we want to send the kids over to the in-laws or the grandparents, and or a friend or whoever, and have that alone time. Creating your own date night at home is really important too. So I think it's a really important thing to converse about, which is, in order to address the anxiety, oftentimes, like Dr. Davis said, we have to address that basic need, which will eventually alleviate the anxiety.
We have another question from the audience. In relation to divorce indicators, what do you do for a couple which seems like divorce is imminent, yet they seem to be in an indecisive zone in terms of continuing due to fear of change, etc. I might add economic dilemmas, so forth. So responses from our panelists.
I actually work with a number of couples who are in a state of difficulty in regards to ambiguity, of not knowing how to take the next step. And so giving options to couples and allowing for room and space to talk about different options. Do we want to do a non-formal separation, or what we would call a trial separation? Do we just need time apart to think? Due to financial struggles, is it possible to separate, right? These are questions that we want to ask ourselves and be able to share with our couples that information, to give them permission to talk about it. Because oftentimes we go back to avoidance and we don't want to talk about separation or divorce. I don't want to hurt my children. I don't want to hurt my spouse. But sometimes separation can be a very positive thing for folks who've been married for a long time and have felt either trapped in the relationship or have felt like they were drowning due to staying stuck in certain patterns of communication that aren't effective. So sometimes being able to give them permission to say, what would separation look like? Let's make a list of what does separation look like? What are the ins and outs, and what's going to happen? How would that look financially? How would that look? And so helping to break down the fear that they might feel.
Anyone else? Other thoughts on that?
I would just add that again, based on the question, how it's phrased, it's not entirely clear, but I would want to definitely find out, are they both on the same page, at least about imminent, divorce or separation. I've certainly worked with a number of couples that seem to be on very different pages around that, and so that adds to the uncertainty, the ambiguity. And so I would probably spend some time finding out about that first, is where is each partner on this issue?
I might be reading into the question as well, trying not to, but I think I hear fear of change, and I think about something that might have to do with grief that may be part of a process of separation or letting go. And what I would say to that is to lean into what those emotions are. That there's sometimes that anticipatory grief that, you know, there maybe hasn't been the loss kind of event yet, but there's some kind of anticipation. And just, you know, I don't necessarily think there's any reason to rush it, but as a lot of times we talk about grief, it's, you can't kind of go around it, you've got to go through it. And so really to pay attention to those feelings.
At this point, we'll go around to each of you as panelists with one final time and one final question. So I'm going to begin with you, Kim, and then we'll go around, give everyone an opportunity to respond. My question is this: could you think of 1 to 2 practical, stress the word practical, suggestions for couples who want to improve their couple connection during these challenging times? Kim?
Yes, I would say decide on something that you can both enjoy, that you both necessarily love, but doing together. And if there's lots of things you can do. You can take a walk or a hike. You know, there are lots of places, if you're in Indiana, are available. Sometimes people go exploring together. But I think to find something that you can each enjoy, maybe something that none of you has done, either of you has done before, and to make that something that you do together.
You're on mute, Dr. Coyle.
Well, I need to chastise myself. So, William, would you like to give 1 to 2? And then anybody else can go.
You're on mute, Dr.
Sorry, guys. I think we just like Reverend Kim mentioned, we you know, we should try new things, right? Sometimes be able to, you know, go outside of your comfort zone and you know, try to a sculpting class. Now there's a lot of options even during COVID where there is social distancing, where you can wear your mask. If you want to make something out of glass, or if you want to make you know, pottery, or even at home, you can do really cool activities. So some of these practical activities that I share with my clients are you can buy really cheap canvases and buy really cheap paint, you know, canvas paint, and you both can put on some music, and you can actually put on a video, a YouTube video that shows you how to paint something simple on a canvas and make it a date night. Less than $15, you can make a really cool date night canvas painting time, where it might have cost you way more out and about, and it's safe, and it's sound, and you can do it from home. You can also even get pottery kits where you guys can make something out of pottery, and then it'll self dry or dry by itself, and then you can paint it and just have conversation. Another thing I suggest to my clients, going back to Gottman's work, he has a really neat app called Gottman Cards, and it's a free app where you can ask random questions based off of the app with your partner, and it allows you to ask questions that you maybe never have asked your partner, and maybe get answers that you've never heard before, and it just kind of gives a little spark to the relationship.
Thank you very much. Anybody else in just the last few minutes?
I'll just toss in, and I struggle with this, so I give myself this advice, is to have at least one meal a day together where you put your phones aside and don't talk about the news or the numbers that are going up or whatever.
All right.
Yeah.
Jacquie, one thing?
One of my favorite between session challenges for couples is for each person to think of one thing that they can do for their partner to surprise them in small ways, and really work on building that.
All right. Would you like to finish our round robin, Christina?
I will. So I think that this is a matter of reframing, but also externalizing that I spoke to earlier. It's just to remember as much as possible that you can be on the same team, and that with all the things going on, to say it's you and I against this pandemic, it's you and I against, the racial stress, it's you and I against the work stress, whatever it is, to remember to kind of frame it such that the two of you are working together to solve problems rather than letting the problems be the other person.
Thank you very much. I want to thank each of our panelists today, and to thank our audience for tuning in. I will give a final word of access to counseling at the Counseling Center. You can ask for a specific approach couples counseling, which would be what all of us do. And a final note that we are having our couples checkup this month. It's free. So it's sometimes a really good way for a couple to get a little mini taste of what it might be like to have a couple session. So thank you very much. And to everyone in our audience, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.